Hey everyone, back here at Primetime Treasure headquarters in Syracuse, New York. Had a great time over in Denver, Colorado, going over to the world's largest comic book store, Mile High Comics, and got a great tour, great interview on camera with the legendary and iconic owner, Chuck Rozanski. Now, the first video that I did a self-guided tour of the shop, and then starting with the prior video, I started showing the initial segment of the interview that I did with Chuck along the way as he guided us through the store. And I've been trying to convey to the audience, especially for people who are not familiar with comic books or the whole history of Mile High Comics, how important Chuck has been in the comic book industry, some of the really pioneering and legendary things that he has done. One of the things that I talked about was how he took out those double-page ads for Mile High Comics in so many comic books in the early to mid 1980s. And now that I'm back here at Primetime Treasure headquarters, I could actually show you an example of that, because the first two videos I did, I filmed from the hotel in Denver. And it's funny, just to show you how prolific this was, I actually came down here, I opened up a comic box that I have right here under my seat, and I picked out the first one. It was an Iron Man issue here. So you can see Iron Man 186, and I said, I bet you if I open it up, I'm gonna find an ad for Mile High Comics. And sure enough, there you could see, these are the ads I was talking about, and you could see how much he crammed in there. It kind of reminds me of how many comic books he crams onto those shelves. It's the same kind of philosophy. He's getting the biggest bang for his buck there, making sure that he's taking advantage of as much space as possible. Now, many of these ads, as I remember them, were double-page ads, but sometimes, just depending on what was going on with the particular comic. So this is Iron Man 184. Once in a while, they look like this. So you'd see this ad, and then you would turn it over, you turn the page over, and then you'd see another one. So either way, Chuck found a way to get his 2 pages in there. So very, very great advertising strategy that he used. But I just wanted you to get a chance to see that, since I've referenced it in the other videos. Now, in the last video, I talked to you about how Chuck acquired the greatest comic book collection of all time. If you want the details, go into that video, the Edgar Church collection. That was in 1977. But I want to fast forward a couple of years, because one of the themes that we're going to talk about in this video, and Chuck's going to take us through, is independence. And that's something that a lot of resellers can relate to. It's the reason why so many resellers are doing what they're doing. They're trying to get out of a 9-to-5 job that they don't really like, or life circumstances that have gotten them down, and they want that freedom. They want to be able to just break out of having to work for somebody else and fulfilling someone else's dream, and they really want to pursue their own independent dream. And that's something that Chuck has really tried to do, and you'll hear him talk about that in a moment. But I want to just take you through a brief little example of something that Chuck did that actually was really a big deal in 1979. So back then, Chuck was ordering about 10,000 comic books a month through Marvel. That's just Marvel. And the way that comic books were ordered back then was that you had to pay for them in advance. And so we're talking about, like, for just those Marvel books would be, at that time, about a $4,000 bill that you just have to shell out. And it wasn't really a bill per se. It's not like they were billing him. He just had to shell out the $4,000. So it wasn't like, hey, pay this later. So that resulted in him and other comic book retailers at the time just basically forking over enough money that would cover what they needed to cover to keep their business going. And they were doing this through distributors. So they weren't getting the comic books directly from Marvel. They had to go through a middleman. And so it took months and months to get the book. So if he made an order in the springtime, he put out $4,000, and the comic books wouldn't come to him until July. So that's a lot of money to just kind of shell out and just, be sitting there and not being able to get your return on it. And so Chuck basically described this as a pretty foolish situation, because he was trying to explain to the comic book companies that not only was he losing money, but they were losing money as well, because if they created a different system, at least if they did a cash on delivery system, or if they did a true billing situation in which they delivered him the books and then he paid them afterwards, that would be a much more tenable situation, and they'd be able to make, an additional, let's say at minimum $1,000 a month on him, just based on additional orders of books that he would carry. Not only that, one of the things Chuck was explaining in this detailed letter that he wrote to the Marvel sales representative, and if you want to read that letter in full and read a lot of other things about the history of comic books, I highly recommend checking out this book. It's called Comic Shop. I referenced it in the prior video. Highly recommend it. I'll put a link to it in the description section. It's an Amazon affiliate link if you want to check it out. So purchasing it does help to support the channel, but it's only about 20 bucks and it's really a good read. Again, highly recommend it. And the letter that Chuck wrote to Marvel is right here in this book, and it's actually a couple pages. And one of the things you'll see is that Chuck is not shy in sharing his opinions. He has strong opinions, he has strong views, and he calls things how he sees them. So if he thinks that something is foolish, or if he thinks that something's stupid, like, he'll literally say that. So for example, as he's writing to Robert Maiello, Marvel's manager of sales administration, he literally says, "Why is this foolishness still necessary?" Or he'll say, "Pardon me for being the one to say it, but that is stupid." He's explaining how in this letter that they're actually losing customers because they're not distributing the comic books well. So the people who he was getting the books from, these distributors, comic books were like at the very low end of their list in terms of what they wanted to get to people. And with comic books, there's continuity involved. You want to continue to read the story over time. You want to get issue 1, 2, 3, 4. Well, if someone's trying to read a story and they get to issue 3 and then they can't find issue 4 anywhere, then that's a big problem. The other thing is that Chuck was trying to remind them that, you needed a little bit of advertisement, a little bit of a sales push within the store to get people to purchase certain comic books. Like the comic book retailer would recommend certain types of books and say why you should purchase this. And he's trying to explain to them, like, you're not going to get that in a 7-Eleven, where you're distributing comic books. So make a better relationship directly with us comic book dealers, because this is what we do for a living. So he laid this all out, and he also let them know in the letter that he's not the only one who feels this way, that there are people, retailers throughout the industry that felt that way as well. So, Chuck wrote in the letter, "P.S. I'm going to distribute this letter as widely as I can and ask my fellow dealers to send you signed copies to indicate their agreement with my points." And so there was no official union or organization at the point. So as Chuck explains, this is the best that I could do to prove to you that other dealers are in agreement with my opinions. So right after Chuck wrote that letter, the vice president for sales at Marvel invited Chuck to come down to Marvel's New York offices. And once they got done with that meeting, basically Chuck Rozanski wound up getting a deal to be a distributor with Marvel Comics. So it was actually like a direct distributor relationship. They just dealt directly with him and sent him the books directly under favorable terms. And other comic book retailers signed up for a similar deal right after that. There were more than a dozen dealers that set up a similar deal. If Chuck didn't write this letter and take a leadership role in the industry, that likely would not have happened. There were other things that contributed to this happening at the time, but what Chuck did played a major role in that occurring. And so I tell you that because I tell you that story because it's not only another kind of iconic thing that happened in the field of comic book collecting, but it also speaks to Chuck's desire to get more independence, to get more favorable terms, to stop being subservient to, some kind of relationship that was going on with a middleman, and that wasn't really helping out him and helping out even the company that was actually dealing with him, Marvel, telling him how their deal made no sense, and it wasn't helping out the comic collectors and the readers. So you're going to see in this interview when Chuck talks about independence and he also talks about patience, he has some strong opinions. Sometimes his language could be a little bit salty, but that's okay because, again, we're dealing with an iconic figure, and my job is not to filter him. If anything kind of starts going a little bit towards the realm of political, my job is then to try to pull things back and make sure we keep ourselves focused on what it is that we're trying to make sure we're communicating to the audience here, which is to focus this on reselling and learning business lessons. So keep that in mind as you're here to interview. It's nothing like really terrible or anything that you're going to hear in terms of language, but just want to make sure you have a little bit of a heads up on that as you go into it, and just so you could understand the context of what you're about to hear. So with that being said, let's go to the next part of the interview.
Right back here, so all these units that are this way, the material that's on them moved here 9 years ago.
Okay.
And so everything that's here I've owned for 9 years or longer. And some of them are things that I bought on closeout, and so I got large quantities, and I'm just sitting on them, and I don't care. But the point is that if you wait long enough, like these Dark Horse books, for example, when Dark Horse lost their Star Wars license, they closed out a lot of their stuff, but they only had X amount of time to do it. And then, as I understand it, don't take this for gospel, this is just what I heard, Disney then required them to shred all their remaining stock. So toward the end, they were selling everything off at like 50 cents a book, so I bought tonnage.
Right.
I don't mind at all, because if you look, there's empty spots here. I mean, we have been selling these. But you have to have the dedication, the wherewithal, the time to sit on stuff for decades.
So what's your advice to someone who comes across something like this, where we're dealing with multiples, we're dealing with a lot of duplicates?
First thing is, don't be an idiot and sell them wholesale to anybody else. Okay? Because there are so many flipper dipshits out there who grab stuff and they'll buy it for $4 and put it up on Amazon for $5, and they'll think they're getting rich because they're morons.
Right.
Okay? Don't give them ammunition. Don't share any of your stuff. Don't think you're being smart by taking a deal like this and chopping it up into pieces and keeping a little bit for yourself. Because all you're doing is flooding the market for a period of time, and then the expression that we use around here is having to wait for the pig to get through the python. Okay, because you'll have this overabundance of a given product for a given period of time until finally the moron factor peters out.
So you would wait for an eventual time where you're willing to sit on this to eventual time where there's not a lot of this stuff on the market, and there's more of a desire
maybe that time never comes. Okay, maybe this ends up being a piece of crap that doesn't ever get a market. But let me explain. If I mark this thing $14, okay, I'm still doing better than if I wholesale them out. Because I'd rather sell one a month, okay, at $14 than sell, 10 a month at $1.50. No, I agree. It just requires patience, but that's an important lesson. Well, patience is what it's all about. But patience requires cheap storage. So if you don't have cheap storage,
very good point.
And you also got to have the financial wherewithal that you're not hurting yourself either through interest charges or, if you're overdrafting your checking account constantly and you're ending up paying all those $40 check dings, you have to have working capital. But there's another bit of advice that I would give, which is never, ever, ever, ever give up a piece. Never, ever give up a piece. Ever.
When you say give up a piece, what do you mean give up a piece?
Every goddamn time that you run into somebody who is a financial advisor, they'll say, well, you need to raise working capital through equity. Okay. That means sell off a piece of your company. Give somebody else the right to tell you what the hell to do. Why do we do this? The answer is we do this in order to tell other people to go screw themselves. Okay? I don't care. I can work my own hours, be my own boss, but most importantly, I can tell anybody and everybody to go screw themselves because I don't have to be a wage slave, okay? Most people in America are slaves. They think they're not. They believe that they actually have some ability to escape from under the master, but there's about 1,000 families in America that control over 50% of the wealth of the entire nation, and everybody in one way or another kowtows to them because they're the ones who set the hospital prices and suck you dry with medical bills. They're the ones who make sure that your insurance rates are going up so that they can pay for their yachts. And I'm incredibly cynical about this. But when you live in this world, the collectibles world, especially if you're not buying from somebody like Diamond a whole lot,
right,
you're putting yourself in a position to where if you want to buy a deal, you buy a deal. If you don't
right.
want to buy a deal, you don't buy a deal.
Right.
Okay? You
right.
are totally free. You realize how little freedom there actually is in America?
Well, gets back to what a lot of resellers talk about in the reselling community is reason they got into it. A lot of them, they leave that 9-to-5 job that they can't stand, that they hate, because they want that independence, they want
right.
that freedom.
But there's sacrifices that are entailed.
Sure.
And, you know, I don't live an ostentatious lifestyle. I mean, I've made money, but I've also been doing this for 50 years, and I've been exercising investment strategies that have paid off for me.
Sure.
And let's not forget about this. I've benefited from 50 years of continually escalating prices for collectibles.
Sure.
If you don't for a moment cast aside your own personal hubris and realize that you are no greater than your context, and if your context fails, it's just like a pond drying up.
Yeah.
You can be the biggest fish in the pond, but it doesn't matter if it
sure.
dries up.
Sure.
Okay, and so we all have to be humble to the extent of being grateful that our context has benefited us and has provided us with opportunities. Now, opportunity does not mean success, because you have to capitalize on that and you have to have blessings. But be that as it may, the number one benefit of being in this business is being able to tell those who would dictate to you that they cannot.
Well, I hope you all enjoyed that part of the interview, hearing Chuck talk about the importance of patience and independence. I'm sure a lot of resellers listening to that really could identify with those themes. For me, the part that I related to the most was hearing Chuck talk about the importance of trying to avoid making that quick wholesale flip and trying to be patient with your investment so it yields a higher return over time. The example I thought about when he mentioned that was, many of you might remember this from my father and son haul video, was this comic book magazine here, The Deadly Hands of Kung Fu, issue number 33, so it's the last issue. I wound up getting these and many others that have sold already, and a lot of other comic books as well, for an average of 43 cents a piece. Now, I could have taken the Deadly Hands of Kung Fu books out, and I could have just sold that stack of them to a local comic book dealer. I could have gone to the shop. I could have just put an ad on Facebook or Craigslist, OfferUp, and I could have sold them for about $2 a piece. I could have felt that I tripled my investment and just, walked away. I wouldn't have had to ship them or anything like that and say, hey, I made money in this situation. But that's not what I did. I decided to be patient with it, and I list one of these at a time. And it takes about, usually about a week or two for it to sell, but it just sits there, it gathers watchers over time, and each one of them so far has sold for between $35 and $40 a piece. And that's exactly the kind of philosophy and mentality that Chuck is talking about there. So hopefully you got some things out of here that you could also apply to your business, or maybe just reinforce some of the things that you're doing. Because remember, this is a guy who has been around and doing this for 50 years. And all the comic book dealers that told Chuck that he wasn't going to be around anymore, well, those are the ones who wound up selling off their comic books to him after they had to close their business. So that's how he obtained a lot of the comic books that he has there. So, he has the right to say what he wants about this stuff because, again, he's still around and he's got the world's largest comic book shop. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed it. There will be another installment coming as well. We're going to cover some additional areas. Thanks for all the comments, by the way. I'm really happy to see how many people are enjoying this series. Even if you don't do anything with comic books, a lot of people have validated what I've been saying, that you still could get a lot out of this. So please let other people know about this series as well, because I do think that there are a lot of resellers who are missing out on it. So if you could let them know, I really would appreciate it. And with that, I'm going to sign off. Just make sure that if you like the video, it will get the video greater exposure by hitting that like button. Make sure you subscribe to the channel, especially if you are new. Also, make sure that you join my Facebook group, the Facebook Reselling Resource Center, and come check me out on Instagram. That's @prime_time_treasure. I'll see you back at the next video, everyone. Take care.